Last year was an awesome year for fans of spaceflight, but believe it or not, 2022 is looking like it might be even more exciting. Today, I want to talk about the 10 events in spaceflight that I'm most looking forward to in the coming year. Number 10, more human spaceflights. In 2021, we saw all kinds of new spaceflight records. At one point, we had 19 people in space at the same time, and at a different point, we had 14 people all in orbit at the same time. I fully expect that in 2022, we're going to, at the very least, tie those records, if not outright break them. Starting things off, we're going to have quite a few flights from SpaceX's Crew Dragon 2 capsule. They will be flying crew to the ISS in April with Crew 4 and September with Crew 5. They are also scheduled to fly the first American private mission to the International Space Station. That'll be the Axiom 1 mission, which is currently scheduled for March 31st. Originally, they were also planning to fly Axiom 2 at the end of the year, but that's currently been pushed back till early 2023. I also wouldn't be too surprised if we see at least one free flyer mission this year, sort of like Inspiration 4 that we saw last year. Also, for commercial crew, we have Boeing's Starliner capsule. Obviously, there have been some delays with that program due to valve issues and other things, but they are planning to fly or refly their OFT-2 mission currently no earlier than May 2022. And if that goes well, there's a chance we might actually see the crewed flight test by the end of the year. Of course, that's contingent not only on a successful orbital flight test, but also on NASA being able to find an open slot in the ISS's very busy schedule in the end of the year. Over in China, we expect to see at least 2 flights of their Shenzhou spacecraft. Shenzhou 14 will fly in May, and Shenzhou 15 will fly in September, both to their space station. And we also have at least 2 Russian Soyuz flights to the ISS, MS-21 in March and MS-22 in September. I also wouldn't be too surprised if we saw at least one tourist flight like we saw a couple times last year, since at this point Russia is used to making 4 Soyuz a year, but now that we have commercial crew for NASA astronauts, they're really only using 2 of those 4 Soyuz for official missions, leaving up to 2 others for potential private missions. On the suborbital side of things, we have Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin and Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic, both expecting to fly some more human flights this year. Last year, we saw Blue Origin's New Shepard capsule fly 3 human spaceflights, all in the second half of the year. So I would fully expect in this coming year to see at least 6 flights of the New Shepard capsule. We also may see 1 or 2 flights of Spaceship 2 Unity from Virgin Galactic. Right now, both Unity and its parent aircraft Eve are currently undergoing some maintenance, but if that goes well, I think we could expect to see maybe another test flight later in the year, and if they get that in early enough, maybe even that flight for the Italian Air Force that's been scheduled for a while before the close of 2022. Number 9, the Tiangong Space Station. So one of the big news items last year that didn't see too much coverage, at least in Western media, was China's launch of their new Tiangong Space Station. This is actually their 3rd space station. They launched Tiangong 1 in 2011 and Tiangong 2 in 2016, but those were both single modular space stations. They were not up in space for all that long, and they weren't visited by too many crews, more comparable to maybe Skylab or one of the Russian early Salyut space stations, or Soviet space stations I should say. But their new space station, also called Tiangong as far as I can tell, is actually going to be a modular space station, much more similar to the Soviet Mir space station or a smaller international space station. Last April, they launched the core module of this new space station, which is called Tianhe, meaning Harmony of the Heavens, and in the coming year, they plan to launch 2 science modules, which will attach to Tianhe. These will be named Wenchan, which means Quest for the Heavens, and Mengchan, which means Dream of the Heavens, and I hope I got my pronunciation right, or at least somewhat close to right on those. This will make China the owner of only the 3rd modular space station in human history, and as I said before, they're going to have 2 human space flights to service this station during the year, as well as some cargo space flights throughout the year. So it's really exciting to see that not only are there continuing operations on the International Space Station from NASA and Roscosmos and their partners, but we now have a second, mostly continuously occupied human space station in orbit around the Earth. Number 8, DART. Last November, we saw the launch of NASA's DART mission, or Double Asteroid Redirect Test, atop a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. DART is headed to a near-Earth asteroid called Didymos. Actually, it's a binary asteroid system, a larger asteroid called Didymos and its moon Dimorphos, which has also been nicknamed Didymoon. And the purpose for DART is to study these asteroids, but not by using a bunch of science instruments as most NASA missions would do. Instead, this year, in October, DART is going to smash into Dimorphos in order to determine how that affects its orbit and to see if a similar maneuver could potentially be used in the future if there's ever an asteroid headed towards Earth, as in all kinds of sci-fi movies, the most recent being Don't Look Up. So it's good that NASA is being a little bit proactive in that regard. Thankfully, if you're wondering, there is no chance of DART accidentally knocking Dimorphos or Didymos into a Earth collision trajectory. There's not enough energy in the spacecraft to do that, and it's just not the way the orbit works. So this is a totally benign test, just to see if the technology would actually work if we ever did need it to potentially save Earth. And while there aren't many science instruments, or really aren't any science instruments on the DART spacecraft itself, DART is going to be accompanied by a small CubeSat called Lucia Cube, which was created by the Italian Space Agency. And the purpose of Lucia Cube is going to be to document the crash of DART into Dimorphos, so we can get some footage of that, at least some, maybe a low quality video or some photos, and then really study the asteroid after the impact to see how DART affected its orbit and its composition. We will also see a follow-up mission in a few years. The European Space Agency will be launching the Hera mission in 2024, which will reach Didymos and what remains of Dimorphos in 2027 to study the long-term effects of DART's impact. So that'll be really cool to see. I hope we get to see some good photos and some nice footage from Lucia Cube, and hopefully the mission goes really well, because obviously an asteroid took out the dinosaurs, and we do not want the same thing happening to us. Number 7, the era of small rockets. So 2021 was a really big year for small-sat launchers. We saw both Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1 rocket and Astra's Rocket 3.3 achieve orbit for the first time. They have joined Rocket Lab's Electron rocket in the small-sat market, and there are a lot of other contenders that are hoping to enter the market soon before it gets too crowded, because while there's projections for an increased number of small satellites to be launched in the upcoming years, that number is not infinite, and all of these small-sat launchers also have to compete with companies like SpaceX, which are offering opportunities for small sats to be launched on their rideshare missions. So it's a very saturated market at this point, and any companies that can't get their rockets to orbit this year or very soon after don't have a really good chance at being contenders in the long term. Last year we saw Firefly launch their Alpha rocket in September for the first time. It did not go exactly as planned. There were some problems with the first stage, but I fully expect to see them launch another attempt later this year. They did have a bit of a delay, as US regulators determined that having one of their Ukrainian investors, who owned a significant portion of the company, posed a national security risk, so they are insisting that he sell off his ownership of the company to somebody else before they can launch again. But it sounds like he's willing to do that, and it sounds like things are going to be back on track soon, and I would fully expect to see them launch Alpha once again this year, perhaps even in the first half of the year if we're lucky. Alpha is a really cool looking rocket, and there's been some really cool behind the scenes footage from Firefly, so I wish them all the best, and I definitely hope to see them join the other rocket companies in orbit this year. Also this year, I fully expect to see Relativity make the first launch of their Terran 1 rocket, and what's really cool about Relativity Space is that their rockets are almost entirely 3D printed, and obviously there's a lot of overhead and development cost that goes into that, but if they can get that to work, at least the way they claim it, that will be the future of cheap rockets. So I think it's a really cool idea. Some of the videos they put out are really interesting, and while I'm excited to see their Terran 1 rocket fly this year, hopefully, what I'm really excited for is their Terran R rocket, which will be flying in future years, which is kind of like a mini version of Starship. I say mini, but it's actually a pretty big rocket, about the size of a Falcon 9 and intended to be completely reusable. So I really hope that their Terran 1 goes well and they can start making some money off of that and fuel the development costs of Terran R. Recently, we did see a bit of footage from Relativity. It was a test of their Aeon engine, which was really cool, although I was a little bit worried by that test, just because if they're still just kind of doing a full fire test or a full duration test of their engine, that tells me that maybe they're not as close to being ready to launch as I originally thought they were. So I think there's a good chance we'll see Terran 1 fly this year, but probably in the second half of the year and not the first half of the year. And if they don't fly multiple times this year, then whether or not they reach orbit is TBD. But once again, I wish them the best of luck, and I really hope that they can join the Orbital Club as well. There's also a good chance we're going to see ABL launch their first rocket this year. They are a small-sat company that you probably haven't heard too much about, but if you want to hear more, I recommend a really great video that Scott Manley recently made on ABL and their rocket, which is called RS-1. They are hoping to fly that rocket early this year, although they had a bit of a setback recently when one of their second stages exploded at the Mojave Spaceport during a routine test. Thankfully, that was not the second stage they were planning to use on their first launch attempt, but obviously they're going to want to take some time, figure out what went wrong with this second stage, and then do whatever fixes they need to on their launch rocket before they try to reach orbit. So hopefully that's something they can figure out pretty quickly and get to the launch stand, because it would be really cool to see them make at least a launch attempt, if not actually reach orbit this year as well. All in all, should be a really exciting year with all these new rockets coming online. Who doesn't love seeing new rockets? And if all goes really well and we get really lucky, we could have 6 small set launchers in the field by the end of 2022. It's definitely going to be a very saturated market, and personally, I don't think all of these rocket launchers are going to make it in the long term. We'll see if they make it to orbit in the short term at least. But either way, it'll be really exciting for us spaceflight fans, and I say, let the games begin. Number 6. JWST Images. So, as most of you probably know by now, last Christmas we finally saw the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. For those who aren't familiar, James Webb is the next generation space telescope that's a collaboration between NASA, ESA, and the Canadian Space Agency. It is a next generation space telescope that in some ways is the successor to the Hubble Space Telescope, but unlike Hubble, James Webb is an infrared telescope, and it also has a much larger mirror. Together, these will allow James Webb to look very, very far into the universe's past, and to see the light from some of the universe's very first stars and galaxies. Over the past month, we've seen a successful deployment of James Webb's sunshield, its secondary mirror, and its primary mirror, and we've also seen a successful insertion burn into the L2 Lagrange point, which is a point in space that's about 4 times further away from Earth than the Moon, so pretty far out in space. Unfortunately, it's still going to be about another 5 months or so before we get any images or real data from James Webb, and the reason for that is because that's how long it takes for its instruments to cool down to the super cold temperatures that they need to be at to operate. So even though it's going to require a little bit of patience, we can expect to see some really cool images and some really cool new scientific discoveries about late June of this year. Number 5. Multiple Falcon Heavy launches. SpaceX's Falcon Heavy is the most powerful rocket currently flying, but so far we've only seen it fly 3 times. Its initial launch in February of 2018, and 2 follow-up launches, both in 2019. So what's the deal? Why aren't there more Falcon Heavy launches? Well, first of all, it's important to note that for a heavy-lift launch vehicle, this kind of a flight cadence really isn't that uncommon. As a comparison, we can look at ULA's Delta IV Heavy, which is the second most powerful United States launch vehicle, and the Delta IV Heavy has only flown 13 times since it first launched in 2004, a flight rate of also less than once per year. However, there are 2 other reasons that we haven't seen any Falcon Heavy flights recently. One is that the Falcon 9 Block 5 ended up being a lot more capable than SpaceX first anticipated, so a lot of the payloads that they thought would have needed a Falcon Heavy to fly ended up being able to fly on a much cheaper Falcon 9 rocket instead. Some of the payloads that did require a Falcon Heavy to fly, for example heavier payloads going to a geosynchronous orbit, ended up getting delayed because of the COVID pandemic. Thankfully, a lot of those delayed payloads are now finally becoming ready for flight, and right now we actually have 5 Falcon Heavy missions scheduled for 2022. Now, I don't think we're going to see all 5 of those Falcon Heavy launches fly this year, but if we could see 2 or even 3 flights, that would be really, really awesome. Right now we have 3 missions scheduled for the US Space Force. Those are all classified, and they are USF 44, 55, and 67. We also have the launch of NASA's Psyche probe as part of its Discovery program, which will study the asteroid Psyche. And we have a rideshare launch of 2 satellites for Viasat and Astronis, which is going to be launched into a near geosynchronous orbit. Like I said, I don't expect all 5 of those to fly, but if we could get even 2 flights this year, that'll be 2 more flights than we've had in 2020 or 2021, and I think I can speak for all of us space fans when I say that would be really exciting, and I really wish the best for SpaceX in getting those launches off this year. Number 4. ULA's Vulcan Centaur. For those who don't know, ULA, or United Launch Alliance, is a joint venture between Lockheed Martin and Boeing, 2 of the United States' largest and oldest aerospace giants. For years, ULA has been flying the Atlas V and the Delta IV Heavy, both of which are very successful rockets. However, they're also very expensive rockets, and they really can't compete with the newer and partially reusable Falcon 9. So to better compete with that rocket, ULA has been developing the Vulcan Centaur. The Vulcan is a brand new medium to heavy lift launch vehicle, and it will fly with the Centaur 5 upper stage, which is an evolution of the Centaur 3 upper stage currently flying on Atlas V. The Vulcan rocket will not be reusable, at least to start. However, they are looking into what they call their Smart Reuse program, which is basically where they're trying to salvage only the engines of the rocket, since those are by far the most expensive part, and to land them via an inflatable heat shield and a parachute. Now, whether they actually fund the SMART program and whether it's successful remains to be seen. Personally, I'm a little skeptical, but I really hope they do, because I really think it's cool how all these different space companies are trying different means to achieve reusability and affordability in space. But while I'm excited about Vulcan Centaur itself, what I'm really excited about is the payloads that it's going to be carrying. The first debut launch is going to be Astrobotic's Peregrine lunar lander, which is hopefully going to be the very first commercial lander on the lunar surface as part of NASA's CLIPS program. And starting in 2023, Vulcan should be flying Sierra Space's Dream Chaser spaceplane, which is this really cool little spaceplane. It's almost like a mini space shuttle, and it's going to be ferrying cargo to the International Space Station, and hopefully one day in the future, crew to private space stations as well. So I'm really hoping that if all goes well, we could see a Vulcan Centaur launch by the end of the year. In all honesty, there's a very good chance this will get pushed to 2023 because there's been some delays receiving the BE-4 engines from Blue Origin. But I do think that ULA is really eager to see this rocket fly, and I know all of us are too. So here's hoping that the stars align and the tests with the BE-4 go well, and that we just might see a launch of Vulcan Centaur by the end of 2022. Number 3. Electron recovery. Last March, Rocket Lab CEO Peter Beck released a video of himself literally eating his hat after announcing that Rocket Lab would be doing two things that he had previously said they would never do. One, recovering their Electron rocket, and two, doing a much larger medium-lift human-rated rocket called Neutron. While we won't be seeing Neutron in 2022, we will be seeing the first real recovery attempts of the smaller Electron rocket. Electron is a pretty small rocket, so unfortunately it's too small to land propulsively the way a Falcon 9 lands. There's just not enough room to store the additional fuel you would need in order to do a landing burn. But because it's so small, it can actually land under parachute, and they've actually recovered a few from the water after landing them with parachutes already, in order to inspect them and see what they need to do to prepare the rocket to be recovered and eventually reused. One of the important things they need to do is not have it land in salt water, which is very bad for rockets. So what they're actually planning to do, and this is no joke, is catch the rocket out of the sky using a helicopter. And that might sound insane at first, but actually this was something that was done by the US Air Force, recovering film capsules from spy satellites back in the 1960s, before you could just transmit digital video down to Earth like they do nowadays. So Rocket Lab has been doing quite a bit of testing with their helicopter and with their recovery teams. According to Peter Beck on Twitter, these tests have gone very successfully and things are going very well. And I would expect to see a catch attempt pretty soon, probably in the first half of this year. So definitely keep an ear to the ground, because seeing a helicopter snatch a rocket out of the sky is going to be absolutely insane, and I am really looking forward to that. Number 2. Artemis 1. You might have heard that NASA has been developing their new Super Heavy Moon rocket, the Space Launch System, or SLS for short. While this rocket is years behind schedule and quite a bit over budget, there is a very good chance we are going to see it fly for the first time later this year. In many ways, you can think of SLS as an evolution of the space shuttle, except supersized and not reusable. SLS will be powered by 4 RS-25 Hydrolox engines. These are the same engines that flew on the space shuttle back when they were known as the SSMEs, or Space Shuttle Main Engines. And it will also be powered by 2 very large solid rocket boosters, the largest ever flown. These were also derived from the Space Shuttle solid rocket boosters, except these will have 5 segments, whereas the Space Shuttle boosters only had 4 segments. Together, the RS-25 engines and the solid rocket boosters will produce more thrust at liftoff and more sound at liftoff than even the Saturn V, making SLS one of the most powerful rockets to ever fly. The first launch of SLS, Artemis 1, will send an uncrewed Orion space capsule into lunar orbit, and if that goes well, it'll pave the way for a follow-up to crewed mission, Artemis 2, no earlier than May of 2024, which will send 3 American astronauts and 1 Canadian astronaut around the moon and back. This will be the first time that humans have been in lunar space, or for that matter beyond low Earth orbit, in more than 50 years, and if that goes well, it'll pave the way for a lunar landing with Artemis 3 no earlier than 2025. So let's all hope for a flawless flight for Artemis 1 and some amazing views from Orion as it circles around the moon. Number 1. Starship Orbital Test Flight. For more than 55 years, the Saturn V has reigned as the most powerful rocket to ever successfully fly, but 2022 might be the year that it finally loses that crown. SpaceX's Starship is not only the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, by far, it's also intended to be the world's first fully reusable launch vehicle. Starship is a two-stage rocket. The upper stage, which is also called Starship, is powered by 6 to 9 of SpaceX's next-generation Raptor engines, and is designed to be refueled in space so that it can act as a transport to send both humans and cargo to the lunar surface and to Mars. Starship will launch atop the Super Heavy booster, which will be powered by between 29 and 33 of the same Raptor engines, producing more than twice the liftoff thrust of the Saturn V. So far, SpaceX has completed 5 low-altitude test flights of the Starship upper stage in late 2020 and early 2021, to varying degrees of success. If you haven't seen those already, I highly recommend you check them out. Watching a rocket the size of a 15-story building hover in midair, do a belly flop, and land propulsively is like something straight out of science fiction. And honestly, with its ability to be refueled in orbit, to take humans into deep space, return them to Earth, and land, Starship really does seem like humanity's first real sci-fi spacecraft. Right now, SpaceX is finishing construction of the ground support systems at their launch site in South Texas, which they call Starbase, and awaiting environmental approval from the FAA, which they expect to receive at the end of February. If all goes well, we could see the first orbital flight attempt of Starship as soon as this spring. Now, that flight may not go perfectly, but SpaceX is known to learn from their mistakes and to iterate for future flights. If we're lucky, we may even get to see some of those future test flights later this year as well. So that's it. Those are the top 10 things in spaceflight that I am looking forward to in 2022. Like I said, it's going to be a very exciting year, and I can't wait to sit back and watch it with all of you. Let me know in the comments which ones you're looking forward to, and if there are any that I missed. And of course, if you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe and all that fun stuff to help the algorithm. But that's it for now. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day, and whatever you do, have fun with it.